Welcome to the mother relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Welcome to the mother relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. What is Coach Kenny Ellis's reaction to Turkey Alalshikh's proposition that pay-per-view prices need to come down? It's not sustainable or healthy for the future of the sport. To that, Kenny Ellis said, I have no problem paying $75 to $80 for a pay-per-view that's worth watching.
Of course he's gonna say that because he hopes to line his pockets with our money.
No matter who Gervonta Davis is fighting, no matter what overmatched or underwhelming opponent they put in the ring with him, in case you're not aware, Coach Kenny Ellis is the assistant trainer to Gervonta Davis, so naturally, he's going to push back.
He's gonna resist.
As Turkey Alalshikh hopes to make pay-per-view fights more affordable for me and you, do you think the people at the PBC on Prime are going to change anything about their price point? Or are you going to be charging people in excess of $75 to $80 for your fights while Turkey charges people in between $15 to $20 for his?
Who's the real bad guy here?
Now, I've already heard it said a million times that this is sports washing. That's what this is, that the Saudis are looking to alter their public image by distracting people with high-profile sports involving high-profile athletes, and I'm not even saying that they're not.
So what if they are?
Show me a first world country that doesn't have some blood on their hands. If you want to get political, if that's what you want to do, show me a first world country that isn't guilty of something.
What do you think? America's perfect? They never did nothing wrong to nobody. What, the United Kingdom?
Don't get judgmental. Don't get political with me, because if you do, all you're doing is throwing stones in a glass house. This is a boxing channel. The conversation pertains to boxing, so stick to boxing. How is Turkey the bad guy for trying to make pay-per-views more affordable for me and you?
You understand that if Kenny Ellis and all these other guys like him have it their way, it never stops. We never stop having to go into our wallets.
Left to their own devices, the fighters and their teams are always going to want more money. It's always going to work out to where they get more money. But money don't grow on trees, and it don't fall out of the sky. The money's got to come from somewhere, and where they want it to come from is from me and you.
$80 a pop, several times a year.
Should you have had to pay per view to see Gervonta Davis fight a late replacement that nobody had ever heard of in Isaac Cruz? You know that Anthony Joshua, he found himself in that same situation. Ahead of the Dillian White rematch that was supposed to be a pay-per-view, when Dillian got popped for the second time and they had to get Anthony a late replacement, they decided to take a haircut on the money.
They decided not to bill it as a pay-per-view. It's just not practical.
To ask people to pay per view for what is a late replacement. The late replacement was Robert Helenius. That's what they decided to do. What Team Davis decided to do?
Isaac Cruz was a late replacement for Rolly Romero, who was going through some legal issues.
Isaac Cruz was standing in for Rolly Romero, but at that time, nobody knew him.
You're gonna charge us $80 to watch Gervonta Davis fight a guy that nobody's ever heard of and nobody knows.
The biggest joke, that Coach Kenny Ellis, who trains Gervonta Davis and hopes to continue to gouge the boxing community, says he has no problem paying $75 or $80 for a pay-per-view that's worth watching. You think it was worth watching you fight a super featherweight in Hector Luis Garcia?
I don't.
Frankly, I don't think the vast majority of Gervonta Davis's fights were worth $75 or $80 to watch. That's why there's a glaring disparity between the numbers he brought in with Ryan and the numbers he brought in with everybody else.
He only hovered around 200,000 buys, at or around 200,000 buys with everybody else.
So where Coach Kenny Ellis says that, well, he doesn't have a problem paying that for a fight that's worth watching, apparently a lot of people do, or a lot of people did.
You didn't do 1 million or 500,000 with anybody other than Ryan. You didn't do that before Ryan. You didn't do it after him.
And you're not going to do that with Ryo. You can forget it, because where you don't have a problem paying that, a lot of Americans do. And that's why less and less Americans are buying pay-per-views.
Turkey Alalshikh noticed.
I don't know if Turkey watches the relay or somebody on his team, or maybe it's just a stout observation on his part that if boxing continues down this path, especially in the American boxing scene, where we're paying more than everybody for a pay-per-view, it doesn't have a future.
You can't really build stars on pay-per-view, as pay-per-views are for stars that have already been built. If they are in fact stars, the numbers tell the story. If they are, or if they're not.
So Floyd had an exhibition match, a pay-per-view a little over a week ago, the rematch with John Gotti, and on the undercard was his young protege, Carmel in Motion.
Many people saw him.
How many people actually bought that pay-per-view to even see this young developing fighter develop? How many?
Long gone are the days of Floyd Mayweather bringing in big numbers on pay-per-view. You don't see any reports stating that he sold 500,000 or over 1 million like he used to.
Because if he did, the distributors of the pay-per-view wouldn't hesitate to brag about it. That if you have something to brag about, that's what you're going to do. And if you don't, you won't.
They didn't.
And on the undercard of that pay-per-view, that didn't sell anything, was a young developing fighter in Carmel Moten that people are not watching develop. Because to develop a fighter, you can't tuck them behind a paywall.
The future of that kid's career, so long as Floyd's promoting him, that's a separate conversation.
This one speaks to what Turkey Alalshikh said in his latest statement, what I've been saying here on this channel, that the more pay-per-views you put out there, the more the audience is going to shrink. Because there's only so many times a year you can ask them to go into their wallets. At a price point of $80 in this economy, with all this inflation and prices on everything going up, people just don't have the disposable income to fritter away on pay-per-views.
And yet there are people within the boxing sphere, like Coach Kenny Ellis, that will push back on Turkey's proposition to make pay-per-views more affordable. That's just plain old greed.
That brand of greed is not exclusive to Coach Kenny Ellis and the other members of Gervonta Davis's team. There are so many in boxing, especially within the American boxing scene, that want to make off like bandits.
They want to be on pay-per-view too. Charge me and you an arm and a leg to watch them.
I am not proposing that we phase out the pay-per-view model. The pay-per-view model has a place within the boxing sphere.
In moderation.
All things in moderation. Not overuse or abuse. And I'd say that in the last 5 or 6 years, that's exactly what they've been doing. Before Turkey even came into it, who was inundating the market with pay-per-views more so than anyone? The PBC.
Turkey didn't come into it until late last year.
You tell me who thought that Luis Ortiz versus Charles Martin should be a pay-per-view on New Year's Day, or that Luis Ortiz versus Andy Ruiz.
Andy Ruiz versus Chris Arreola. That's a pay-per-view?
If you let them have it their way, it never stops. Because to them, it's always supposed to work out to where they get more money, but the money they're looking for is our money.
You want to give it to them?
You probably don't. You're probably watching them via illegal streams, but if you're doing that...
That's to the detriment of the sport. There's no such thing as a free lunch.
You're asking yourself, how is that to the detriment of the sport? When the big broadcasters see that these pay-per-views don't generate anything, they'll decide that boxing just isn't worth the trouble.
Like Showtime and Fox did?
It's not worth the money, and the sport will fade even further into the background. The solution?
Make boxing affordable again. Make boxing accessible again. Give it back to the people.
That's what Turkey wants to do, and that's what Coach Kenny Ellis is pushing against. So I'll ask you again, in this story, who's a good guy and who's a bad guy?
What benefits you as a boxing fan and what doesn't?
Use your critical thinking skills, if you even have any. Pay-per-view, ideally, is for fights and fighters that are already built. But you still have to bring in the next generation. You still have to usher them in so that they can be built in the next wave of super fights.
So that they can be built.
Not everything that ends up on pay-per-view is pay-per-view worthy. And what ends up on pay-per-view these days, a lot of the time, has less to do with the audience that is expected to consume these pay-per-views and more to do with the fighters and what they want to make for a fight.
Hustling backwards.
The market dictates the value of a show, not the fighter, not the fighter's manager, not the team, the coaches.
The market.
It's down to the audience and whether or not they want to pay.
This downward spiral.
It's almost like boxing is eating itself, or it has been, because it's the people within boxing that want to take from it, make off like bandits at the expense of the consumer and the expense of the sport itself. for their own financial gain.
However big or small.
Which wouldn't be so bad if the gains were actually big and robust numbers, robust metrics were coming in, as that would speak to a healthier market than the market actually is. But when the numbers are consistently low,
You guys just keep pumping out pay-per-view after pay-per-view.
$80 a pop, get them while they're hot.
It's not sustainable.
The fighters and their teams don't care about the long run, and they don't actually care about the health of the sport if they can manage to make a few dollars while ganking me and you. They don't actually care. That's a problem.
Not that I expect them to be altruistic and self-sacrificing, because I don't.
Pretty sure that most of the fighters you see want to make the money, take the money, and run. Take the sport for all it's worth, and whatever happens afterwards, happens afterwards.
It's not my problem.
That's the attitude, but it very much is their problem, because you guys are trying to squeeze blood out of a grape. You're trying to bleed an already exhausted audience.
Pay-per-view fatigue.
So when Turkey proposes that the price point for a pay-per-view be scaled down to $15 to $20, his competitors are not going to like that.
Not just Kenny Ellis.
But any fighter, every fighter that has intentions of billing a pay-per-view at an $80 price point, it's going to be that much harder to sell when the other game in town is undercutting them.
By a lot.
$15 to $20 is 4 times less than what we've been paying.
These are British pay-per-view prices.
So for a long time now, the powers that be have been waiting for the technology to catch up to the piracy with no avail.
That if they can get a fix on this piracy situation, either find a way to block those illegal streams or penalize the pirates to deter them
from what can only be described as digital shoplifting, maybe that many more people will end up buying these fights. But if the price point doesn't change, the practices won't change. What Turkey is suggesting, that might actually make a difference.
even with the piracy.
You see, the price point is the problem. Pay-per-views didn't always cost $80, $75, or $80. There was a time when they were less expensive. It was after Maypac, the Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather fight, that the price shot up, and it stayed up, and it's been up ever since.
It started with that fight, and you might be able to understand the price point for that fight because that fight was 5 years in the making. It was all anyone was waiting for at the time.
But that eventually became the price point for almost every fight that wasn't that fight on the scale of Maypac, nowhere near.
And that only helped to deter more customers than it attracted. It's too much.
A lower price point might leave customers feeling so inclined to actually purchase the pay-per-view instead of navigating sketchy websites and their pornographic pop-up ads,
Malware,
viruses infecting your computer, identity theft.
For $15 to $20, you can skip all that and not run those risks.
Not deal with laggy and unreliable streams and streaming sites.
So what's so wrong with Turkey's proposition?
Oh, is he the bad guy?
Boots got 4 million for the purse bid. Do you know how purse bids work? Like, you haven't got a fucking clue. This is easier for you to know. The payments for Boots and Norman for the unification, because of what Boots was prepared to take for the unification, would be a 50-50 split.
You heard it from the horse's mouth. If Brian Norman would have accepted the $1.7 million offered to him, he would have been getting the same amount of money that Jaron Ennis was getting. But then you ask yourself, why would Jaron Ennis only get $1.7 million when he made so much more in his previous fight?
In his last fight.
His last fight went to a purse bid, and Matchroom had to ensure that nobody comes in with their wallet and takes the fight from them. So they overpaid. They paid around $4 million or close to $4 million. Boots got the lion's share of the pot because Boots was the champion. That's why he got paid so much.
Matchroom had to ensure that they won that purse bid, that they kept the rights to that fight.
And they did. But this fight and this fight, there's no purse bid. You guys are both champions. You have to come to an agreement. The Normans,
They basically wanted more money than Boots stood to make.
if Boots was willing to take $1.7 million for the fight and they offered you $1.7 million, but you won't fight for less than $2.2 million, you want more money than him.
From his promoter.
Claiming that they know their worth Yet your own promoter isn't putting up that kind of scratch, that kind of dough for you.
So maybe you're overestimating what you're worth. We touched on this in passing in my previous video, that it was going to be a 50-50 split, even though I don't think it should have been.
Eddie Hearn said that something like 2 or 3 days ago. This is the video. We touched on it in passing. Oddly enough, Kenny Ellis, who I just talked about, Kenny Ellis seems to agree. Brian should have took the money.
Kenny Ellis, who I think is greedy, very greedy, but not stupid.
Yeah, 1.7.
Oh, hell yeah. Make your life a whole lot easier if you know what to do with it. You know?
He said, hell yeah.
A whole lot easier.
Um,
And he
do
got
you,
and he's still young. If he come up short, he can bounce back. You know?
and you still got that check.
You know? That was it. Shit, he should have took that.
Do you feel like there'll be, like, do you feel like that's going to be a situation that, hey, you know, you might lose from a top guy, you know, they're going to feed you to the wolves anyway, so now it's like you're going to get 2, 3, 300.
Who else you gonna see that kind of money with? And he ain't guaranteed to win, you know? No offense, but damn, he should have took that.
He said, they said that they know their value.
But you got to prove yourself, right? If you on the top of the throne and I fight you and I beat you for a little bit of money, now I can start, you know, dictate what I want because I beat you. You can't come in. I can't come in making what you make. You know what I mean? I got to beat you first.
Kenny asked the same questions I was asking. Where is Brian Norman going to get $1.7 million from?
Not Top Rank.
Behind the scenes, behind the curtain, I have it on good authority that the people at Top Rank actually wanted Brian to take the fight. They wanted Brian to take the second offer because for them, it would have been free money. You figure that for a show that Matchroom is paying for, they're going to get their cut. Something like $300,000.
At no expense to them. For a show, they're not paying for. For them, it's free money. For a fighter, they don't turn over a profit on anyway.
Brian is not yet a draw. Even if he's a world champion, almost nobody knows him.
That's the rumor.
I was told the people at Top Rank actually wanted Brian to take the fight. They wanted him to take the second offer, so as you can imagine, of course they would have wanted him to take the third. It was for more money. They get their cut, he gets the fight he claimed he wanted.
They get to turn over a profit, and if he loses, he's still young.
Now they've got to figure out what to do with this kid. What I think they're going to do, they're going to cash him out. They're going to try to cash him out with Teofimo Lopez like they wanted to.
They're not going to break the bank to get Brian unification matches. They're not. They're not going to break the bank to get him Stanionis, a Barrios, a Boots.
They're not going to pay for those guys to cross over. And on their own side, they ain't got a whole lot going on at welterweight. All they can hope to do is revisit the Lopez fight.
Hope he doesn't fuck it up this time.
But you know, you ain't gonna make $2.2 million fighting Teofimo Lopez. I don't even know that he'd make $1.7 million fighting Teofimo.
Teofimo's the known fighter. He's gonna be the A side. He's gonna want to be.
Now the case of a fighter overestimating their value, in effect, shooting themselves in the foot. The moral of the story, as much as the Normans were talking about wanting to fight Boots, in the end, they didn't really want it.
It was just talk.
So he'll fight on the undercard of Keyshawn Davis's next fight, and then after that, Top Rank will see if they can cash him out with Teofimo.
That's the gist of it.